G'day there, ladies and ladies. Welcome back to another episode of Pokemon Links. Today we're going to be exploring what a shiny Pokemon means within the universe of Pokemon. Is it just a cosmetic change, or is there something more sinister to be revealed? The goal of Pokemon Links is to see if we can connect the dots that Game Freak have perhaps hidden inside the world building of Pokemon. They aren't going to openly admit the dark aspects of their children-focused franchise, but that's where we step in. So let's just jump straight in. Now, shiny Pokemon have been in the mainline games since Generation 2. There's a very low chance of encountering one, about 1 in 8,000 or so. This chance can be influenced by items and conditions, but that will be talked about later. The main difference between a shiny Pokemon and a regular Pokemon is its coloration. Some Pokemon have very similar color patterns between shiny and non-shiny variants, but others have a massive color palette swap. Another noteworthy difference is a small sparkle animation whenever it emerges from a Pokeball. I don't know if what shiny Pokemon have to constantly worry about their sparkle animation. You can imagine that trying to sleep and a loud bright sound every now and then would be very annoying. I think it's more probable that this sparkle isn't in the world, but if you want to say that it's a real thing, then you can imagine how life as a wild creature would be impacted by it. However, even the color change is enough to change how the Pokemon lives. Animals and Pokemon develop natural tools to survive in their environments, and while Pokemon are relatively quick to adapt through evolution, they still need to rely on the overall adaptations of their species. Blending into the environment as either predator or prey is very fundamental towards survival, and so suddenly being a bright color that doesn't fit the biome would make your life so much harder to the point of perishing early. Predator Pokemon wouldn't be able to hunt as easily, and prey Pokemon wouldn't be able to hide as easily, which makes being a shiny not ideal, but there may be one benefit to being shiny. When it comes to Pokemon breeding, being the same as other Pokemon puts you in a neutral state, but being vastly different from your species, like being a shiny, could be the highlight you need to attract more mates. It could also, however, be used against you, as you may be seen as an inferior breed, or are deemed an unproductive member of your species. It's a double-edged sword, but at least there's a small benefit. In Gen 2, shinies are determined by a personal biological set of stats known as DVs, which in later generations you may know as IVs. This gives us our first glimpse of what it means to be a shiny, which is that it's genetic. All shinies, no matter what, will share the same set of DVs, which also means that they are never going to be the pinnacle of their species. Fundamentally, shiny Pokemon have less potential than regular Pokemon. The stats are still somewhat decent, but if you are using a competitive Pokemon, it's better not to have a shiny. Being tied to DVs, however, allows for shiny breeding. Since the baby will draw some DVs from the parents, shiny Pokemon have a better chance to create a shiny offspring. Since shininess is genetic in this generation, is passed down between generations, and has lower potential than other Pokemon, it could be argued that the equivalent in our world is a disability. Not all disabilities are passed on, but we'll probably not have one medical fault passed on to us, or someone we know. This can be things like allergies, for example. The disability can be big or small, the point is that it's genetic and somewhat debilitating. In later generations, where there's no longer tied to IVs, you can think about it as more of an aesthetic difference. For example, a person with red hair. Not a disability or anything like that, just different and less common. Not much changes between the generations. The main difference, as I said, is that it's no longer tied to genetics. Shiny Pokemon are just pure cosmetic. There are ways to increase the shiny odds, however, which raises some concerns. What does it mean in-universe to raise the shiny odds? Like, for real. It took me a bit to kind of figure out, but I do have an idea. The main ways to increase shiny odds is by the Masuda method, which involves breeding Pokemon from different country origins, the shiny charm, and whatever shiny chain method is in the region. This could be SOS calls, chain fishing, chain catching, poke radar. I think you get the point. Now, as it stands, shiny Pokemon are born that way, implying that by knocking out or catching X amount of Pokemon, you will eventually find a shiny. To put in other words, there is always a shiny in any given population, it's just a matter of reducing the population. I personally do not like this sentimentality. It just doesn't make sense that there is kind of like a guaranteed shiny wherever you are, and it's just a matter of searching hard enough. So, I propose my own theory. While there are Pokemon that are born shiny, there is also a process that allows for the conversion of a Pokemon into a shiny. Let me explain. If we can connect two shiny methods together, we can infer the third. So, let's connect the dots. The Masuda method is up, and while it may raise more world-building issues to have different metagame countries within the Pokemon world, I think we can ignore that aspect and focus on the intent. Now, if you were given a designated breeding partner from another country, no say, no way to oppose, you can imagine some of the things that you would be thinking. One such thing might be, is this a dedicated breeding plan? Do I have to breed with this partner because there is something wrong? Is this necessary for the continuation of my species? This last question is most interesting. You can think of it as some of the last endangered species crossing international borders to try to propagate the species. While not a direct link, it could be possible that this is the same kind of logic thought of by the Pokemon. I'll connect it to the shinies in a moment, but let's look at chain encounters. Here, we either defeat or catch members of a population. Effectively, we are aliens to the community, either abducting or defeating all that stand in our path. And here is the connecting element that causes shaming to occur. Stress. Both the Masuda method and the chain encounter method develop a sense of stress to the Pokemon. Perhaps it's still tied to genetics, but with enough stress, a Pokemon can turn into a shiny. The Masuda method is causing offspring to be affected by the change in the parent, while the stress of being one of the last of your community from the chain encounter method causing the individual to change. This theory of stress being related to shinies can also be used with the most famous shiny, the Red Gyarados. Team Rocket at the Lake of Rage are using radio waves to force Magikarp to evolve prematurely, which, as you can imagine, would lead to high levels of stress. I don't remember how old the Red Gyarados is, but if it is an older story, it could then just be justified as a prototype device back in the day. It's still possible it's a natural shiny, but I just thought it was worth mentioning that it could be due to stress. And so finally we get around to the shiny charm. We have a connecting factor between two shiny methods, which I think is pretty decent. So how does that relate to the shiny charm? Well, using this theory, the shiny charm affects all Pokemon in a way that promotes stress or anxiety. There are a few Pokemon moves and abilities that could be somewhat emulated. The moves Spite, Curse, Nightmare, and Perish Song. Also the abilities Pressure and Unnerve could easily raise levels of stress. If I had to make a guess, I'll go with a version of Perish Song. The right kind of frequency that only Pokemon are affected by makes sense, and with how there is a visual countdown in Perish Song, something similar that is permanent rather than a countdown makes sense. Imagine if you could see a little spirit that always hovers you and fills you with dread, or a constant alarm sound that can't be turned off. There is no way to defeat this attachment, no way to prevent it. Even if you are a ghost type or have the soundproof ability, you will be affected by the shiny charm. The shiny charm causes constant stress to all Pokemon with a set radius around you, encouraging Pokemon to mentally snap and turn shiny. And so that's the end of the video. Let me know what you think of this theory in any ways it could be tweaked or improved. I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.